All right, everybody. Here we have a little bit of a react. This is all from Marcillian, and he is talking about, well, this is Flame, Marcillian Online, and they're talking about tank aggro. So if you've gone to do your Mythic Plus and you see your tanks jumping off, trying to get everything, generally, you know, as a DPS, you have to not try and pop off for about 5 seconds if you want to be safe. This way, the tank can get all the aggro. But as we're going to find out, tank aggro is a joke. And let's see what this is all about.
Hey, what up? Listen, YouTube, tank aggro is bullshit. And this is part of a much larger problem with tanks that even got prominent. Mythic Plus extraordinaire WoW player and WoW content creator Dorky disqualified from last week's MDI, and I don't think it was his fault. From a different perspective, Season 2 is doing a lot of great things right, like a lot. But there's still one area where it's currently still sucking, well, probably more than one area, but this particular one is making tanks go extinct. And it's giving you 45-minute queue times to find a tank, or maybe not 45, but you're likely not getting into dungeons because there's not enough tanks for people, probably not enough healers as well, but that's a topic for a different video. The tank issue has to be resolved, and hopefully we can fix WoW with this, because not having tanks being incentivized to play the game is not anything new. It has proven to be a big problem for last season when we had a shortage of tanks and healers because it was a very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, one thing everybody says, if you watch any video to get accepted into groups quickly, you want to play a healer or you want to play a tank. All right. Now, both of those require skill. They require for the tank route planning and knowing when to press your CDs. For the tank busters, you know, as a healer, when knowing to make sure that you're mass dispelling or you're dispelling and you're throwing out and saving your heals. For these big pulls or the suppression as a disc priest, you know, things like that. It's very tough. I've tried it. I am not good. You know, I am constantly trying to make sure that I'm not getting my party killed. But if you want to try and make an effort towards the community and you want to try and play something different, you want a challenge, try tanking or try healing.
Season to actually be a tank in. This time around it's a little bit easier, but arguably still a big problem to find enough tanks and healers in the game because their gameplay is way more punishing, it involves way more responsibility, and people don't want to do it because they will be flamed in chat. And be on the receiving end an unfortunate amount of toxicity. And in order for them to want to play the game, or for more people to gravitate towards these roles, we need to incentivize them to do so. And maybe if we get this video in the hands of the devs, we can actually have our voices heard and our struggles answered. Unless you think I'm wrong, in which case you can leave a comment down in the description below after you like and subscribe to this channel. Shameless plug. But let's get back to the topic at hand with tank aggro. So what exactly happened last week in the MDI, which it's Mythic Dungeon Invitational, Mythic Dungeon International, Mythic Dungeon Intentional, something like that, where people essentially form teams, group up, and then just duke it out in Mythic Plus competition where they push keys higher and higher and higher to get more and more score. What did our boy lovely tank Dorky do? He essentially used the potion that exists in the game from alchemy that once you pop it, you emanate waves of little trickles of damage around you to, in the hopes of what he was trying to accomplish, gather mobs easier.
Yeah, you're trying to, in the initial pull, especially for an MDI team, I'm sure they're going in there and they're not like every other mortal. They're pushing higher content to the point where they're trying to beat the clock. So the clock this time is more so you're trying to make sure you get a quicker time through the dungeon, a faster time through the dungeon than your opponent. And so he used these potions that he had mailed from his other character to his character that he was running in the MDI. Didn't ask if it was allowed. He had already been doing it for 4 previous dungeons and not been called out. So apparently somebody brought it up to the powers that be and said, hey, is this allowed? Because so-and-so is using it. We want to know. So they went in, they investigated. He actually told him, well, if you're going to disqualify or take those points away, then might as well take the points away for the other 4 because I've been using this potion since the very beginning. So they did just that. And then they DQ'd him.
While pulling into the dungeon.
He was pissed. He was pissed. Have you listened to the bench? Oh my God. Or not the bench, Potty C. He was using the F-bomb. He was mad.
To build up threat, because it's so difficult to build threat if you want to push dungeons. We're gonna get to those issues in particular. Now, the way this works with Mythic Plus is sometimes if you pop some potions before the timer reaches its conclusion and you actually start the dungeon, if you pre-pot or pre-use some of the cooldowns, you get to keep them as the dungeon starts, and then they get reset because once a key starts, all of your cooldowns are reset. And with that, you can use an extra additional potion. Now, that's not necessarily a problem because he could have just as well popped the potion after the dungeon timer start, but he probably used the DPS potion for that particular pool. Competition, big damage, we all know that jazz. But he needed that to be able to gather enough mobs and keep aggro on them as his team was following him and trying to accomplish the key and what they essentially were going to do. And why would he use that? Obviously, the quick answer is, well, it's competition, bro. We use every little bit of edge. That's true,
Yep.
but that has to be used because of a different problem. Because otherwise, he would have used a DPS potion, something that gives you agility or crit or mastery or whatever you want to get you to do more damage out there. He used that potion because he needs all the help he can get to maintain aggro. And
like if you guys play Mythic Plus, you know these guys are hitting in the millions. I go into Cinder Brew in that first pull to the right, I'm hitting 20 million. So these guys at the high level of play that they're competing at, these guys are popping off probably for 30 mil. You know, they hitting all the right buttons. They're taking all the right battle pots, and they are just creaming. And the amount of damage, I'm just saying the amount of damage. Where's his damage meter? Damage done. I'll have to see if I could see any more numbers, but these guys are probably holding off. So if you see, it's only right now Flame Clap, which is him, I do believe. He's the only one doing that because the DPS already knows to let him get all the aggro on this pull.
I have experienced this on a lot of the tanks so far. I haven't played with all of them, and some of them don't really have this issue because they're just overtuned in terms of damage, but it's no surprise that this season...
Look at that, dude. As a tank, he's doing 51 million damage. I think that's overall, and then 2.36. That's crazy.
Tank DPS has been at an all-time low, and now we're getting to the issue at hand. Tank DPS is incredibly low. Now, there is an argument to be made about tanks essentially like...
The tank, with the exception of Prot Warrior is just blasting. I have seen them do some amazing damage. I've seen a lot of DPS under the tank after the pull is done because the tank is just, as a Prot Warrior, is just killing it.
Liking to deal big DPS because why wouldn't you? That is really fun, but we can argue, we can agree to disagree that that's a good thing for the game. That's not really what's important. What's important is that tanks do enough damage to keep aggro. That's one of the first things you want, particularly in Mythic Plus, because in raids is not usually an issue. That can happen an issue if the difference in damage between tanks is too high, where one tank that's not tanking the boss, that shouldn't be tanking the boss, rips aggro from the current tank and gets another stack of a tank debuff that he's not supposed to get, that eventually kills him. That's also a problem, and that usually gets fixed by Blizzard generally tuning the single target DPS of tanks a little bit more evenly. When it comes to AoE though, it's a whole different story. Now, there are a bunch of issues why tank aggro is a problem this season, and I won't go into all of them because I might not know all of them, but the ones that I do know are very obvious, and it's likely that you have encountered them as well. And if you lost aggro to some DPS, there's two reasons as to why that happened, and they're not mutually inclusive. So I guess mutually exclusive. One of them is that you're bad. So let's explore that for a second. I have a problem with this term bad, being a bad player, because player skill, the way I see it, is a spectrum in World of Warcraft. It's relevant to the context that you're in. You can.
I think if you're doing 10s, you could be mid. Now, when you start doing 17s, that's a special type of player to me. I haven't reached that level of skill yet. I'm still doing 14s, but like I go into these dungeons and I see these guys that you wonder, have they been playing? Or even the raid. Like we're 12, 13 weeks in now to the season, and we've all been in Liberation of the Undermine. And you're curious, why is that guy taking that circle and bringing it into the group? You're supposed to take that, I'm talking about in Muggsy. You're supposed to take it to the wall and soak it at the wall. No, these fucking guys, they're bringing it right there. And they just drop it right there. I'm like, oh my God. And then the when you got to do the jails, these guys don't know what they're doing, man. They're all over the fucking place. They're over there. Like they're putting them on the boss. Oh, help me, God. Help me, Jesus.
Really be a bad player in world content if you just do questing. You just hit the mob dies. You can be a bad player if you go into a plus 15 in Mythic Plus and hit the same ability and not pop a defensive and you die. But since that's all relative, it's basically based on the context. The problem is that being bad at the game is something that comes and goes. It's something that you can work through. It's something that, you know, eventually go
like this particular fight here. And sorry to interrupt again, but I'm going to talk about this fight here. It took me time to actually understand this mechanic, but I wasn't afraid. I would ask. I'm like, how does this work? I am still unsure of it. You know, so they explained it to me. I tried to grasp it as best I can. And I just know whenever I get that, I take that shit to the tank. And hopefully he can grab, you know, it just transfers and then we split the damage. You know what I'm saying? But there's people that won't even ask, won't even try to participate at a high level.
Goes away once you play enough. The problem is that if you have an issue that wasn't an issue, even though you're playing the same class, the same spec with the same rotation, then we have a problem. Then essentially you can say that in this season, tank threat has become a new mechanic that tanks need to engage with. And now we go to the second part of that problem. Tank threat is indeed an issue, and this is why I believe so. And I will give the devil its due. I think tank threat should be a mechanic that exists in the game. Otherwise, we end up with situation like, what was it, BFA or early Shadowlands, where tanks BFA would do so much instant burst damage that they would have infinite aggro on the mobs and they can just run around and never take.
But is that a bad thing? You guys let me know down in the comments. Is that really a bad thing? Do you want to lose because you're pulling aggro off of your tank? I'd rather lose to not hitting my buttons. If tank has to be another thing that I have to watch out for, I mean aggro, if that has to be another thing that I watch out for, is that really the way I want to lose the game? I don't know. Like I said, let me know. I'm kind of twisted on this. Maybe somebody can open up my eyes why this is needed.
Take damage because the mobs will never attack the DPS players. That would be a very terrible way to play the video game and very terrible way to play tanks, because that would essentially make it sure that everybody can push hierarchy since the tanks don't ever die.
No, I don't. That's not how I view it. That's not how I view it. I view it as that doesn't guarantee that you're going to time the key. We've seen tanks out there that can keep the aggro, but you end up dying because for whatever reason, you stand in bad. You don't do the mechanic properly. Your healer can't keep up with all the incoming damage. One of the things that they did this season, more than others, is they're doing more unavoidable AoE damage that is constant by way of dots and things like that. Your healer has to keep up with that. And we don't press defensives as well. You got to know when to press defensives. I will give you this. There are weak auras out there, and I hate to say weak auras because they'll be a thing of the past within the next 5 years, I'm sure, that you have voice notifications of when to hit a defensive. You know, case in point, Priory, you know, on Delcry, and it says AoE, AoE, AoE. Then you put on your defensive. I mean, the game is doing everything except hitting the button for you.
die. And we had that world before, we don't want to have that world again, it's not very fun. Now, tank threat should be something that players engage with, and fine-tuning exactly where that should be is indeed a balance issue. There are also other issues that come to play. First of all, let's talk about Vengeance Demon Hunter, my newest experience tanking 10s, 11s, and 12s the other day. Well, it was yesterday as I'm recording this, but it's probably last week when you're seeing this. And I had probably the most amount of threat issues almost ever, with the exception of maybe Brewmaster. Now, Vengeance Demon Hunter is a meta tank. Vengeance Demon Hunter is, I believe, the tank that maybe Dorky used in the MDI as well. Definitely the meta tank that was used to push the highest of the keys in MDI. So you would think that these types of issues don't affect it. Well, Vengeance Demon Hunter has been the prominent recipient of insane amount of bugs related to threats, which over the course of the season so far have been fixed from what I understand. Most of them, maybe all of them. And in that case, then this is an even bigger problem. So what is the issue then? Well, it could be the low amount of damage that the skills give, and part of the bigger problem with WoW's design is the synergy between the skills. Vengeance Demon Hunter builds up a lot of damage with synergizing its abilities. You can spread your fiery brand onto many other targets for the defensive purposes, but that also increases the fire damage that you eventually do. And if you pop Sigil of Flame and then Immolation Aura essentially extends the fiery brand and extends Sigil of Flame, which Sigil of Flame is a big part of your overall damage and a big part of your overall threat. Now, these abilities are essentially a combo, and once you pop Fiery Brand, it has to spread to a bunch of targets, and with that, you essentially pop Sigil of Spite and then Sigil of Flame, but you have to wait a little bit for that to spread to be able to do enough damage. Now, obviously, if you wait that long, which is what I did because I read the tooltip of the abilities and I thought, oh, this increases the fire damage that I do, and I want to use my fire damage abilities when most enemies have this debuff on, so I can do the most amount of damage to be an efficient tank and to be able to essentially hold aggro, was my thought process. But boy, was I wrong, because that's not how you should play. There are different ways of pulling with Vengeance Demon Hunter to make sure that threat isn't an issue, one of which is to pull at range and get all the mobs to come towards you, and then pop Fell Devastation. This is a common issue.
Yeah, that's, I was going to say, not once did I hear anything he was saying that Fell Devastation. That you definitely do that to get all your big damn out there. And then I always used to do chains while making sure that I keep my spikes up and my immolation aura. Right now, the way that they have it, Vengeance can nearly have 100% uptime on their defensives, which is something that they had been lacking after their nerf, you know, to the sigils in the class, because they were, of course, meta. And I think for 2 seasons in a row, everybody needed or wanted to play or have a Vengeance Demon Hunter as their tanker in the group.
Or a common solution to this problem that people have been using and employing this entire season. It's not necessarily a bad solution, but it does forego some intuitive gameplay on Vengeance. So new players that get into Vengeance might not figure this out, because what Vengeance does have as abilities when pulling a target? Well, you have Infernal Strike. And if you Infernal Strike into a pack, you die. So you have to Infernal Strike and deal damage. Then you want to throw Glaive. Throw Glaive is bugged and ends up pulling the entire dungeon. So how exactly are you supposed to play right now when all of the intuitive abilities don't actually build the threat that you need, or are...
That sounds like it's more of a bug. By the way he's talking about it, it's not something that it's intended. It's not working as it's supposed to.
AoE capped. And now we go to the second issue of the story, and that is Prot Warrior. And this encompasses a bigger issue with tanks. Prot Warrior right now plays Colossus as the hero talent. Now, Colossus does the most amount of damage, and ironically, Thunderclap, which has been over the course of so many years the ability to do damage to enemies around you, to essentially gather them up, build up that threat and that aggro so you can start DPSing and, you know, roll your defensives up.
Yeah, Thunderclap used to be that one ability is something kind of like your chains. Once you go in there, you Thunderclap, and that's supposed to really be a great aggro generator to make sure you're keeping everything in line and not on your party.
Well, Thunderclap is tuned very, 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 very low for Colossus. So the damage that it does is so insignificantly small, it doesn't actually build enough threat to keep aggro on from players that are, let's say, equally geared as you and are just blasting their DPS cooldowns. And it's also capped. Well, tanks essentially are AoE capped, but they're kind of soft cap, where their damage gets reduced past 5 targets or past 8 targets.
That's why as you're going into a group, you should be tab targeting towards everyone to try and put some damage on all the mobs individually, AoE wise, because you do have that target cap.
I guess depending on the ability that you use. And that is essentially a problem because you will always pull more than 5 minions, despite what the devs might want us to do in Mythic Plus. Nobody enjoys fighting 5 minions at a time. Maybe there's like that one.
No, they don't, because they're popping all their cooldowns, and they'll always get on the tank to pull bigger so that they're not just wasting their cooldown on 5 packs. It's not... it's not efficient. Not efficient.
One group that does +5s or whatever key, and then they just like to take a chill, and that's fine. They have that freedom, but let us have the freedom of pulling more because that is what's fun in the game. And if you do that, tanks will essentially start to lose out on the damage on the other mobs, because if I'm fighting 10 to 15 mobs and my ability starts to do less damage past the number 5 mob, then the other mobs will have less threat generated from me. And when you have Balanced Druid with Starfall or Elemental Shaman with Earthquakes that are uncapped and are hitting everything giga hard, and that's fun, by the way, don't remove that please, then I eventually just lose aggro on them, and that's just not good game design. Okay, I understand the capping of certain abilities. I understand that some abilities do uncapped damage because they're more difficult to use, or they have some intricacies or obstacles they need to overcome to be able to be used, like Earthquake. You have to have everything inside the Earthquake and things move a lot of the time, so you will lose damage that way. So there's pros and cons to all of these. But tanks shouldn't have that issue. Threat shouldn't be a game design problem. Threat should be something that tanks should be aware of. Okay, I need to have aggro on all of these. I'm going to use my AoE abilities. But if you use your AoE abilities and you still don't have threat, then what are you then supposed to do? Then you probably...
Well, then you throw a taunt in there on one that's going towards your ranged or your healer. You try his best to get everything back under control. I mean, I can see the issue. If there was any tanks that watch this video, let me know down in the comments what class you play, and let me know how you gather your, like, what is it that you use as your major generator for large pulls. I'd like to know that. Thank you.
Panic like I do, and they're like, oh my god, I'll taunt that one, go to that one, charge to that one, leap to that other one, and then I die because I have to use all of these other abilities to build aggro and not use my defensive abilities. Of course, there are tanks that are really good at the game and don't have that issue or have worked through that issue. And that is the, maybe you're bad at the video game thing. But then we go into the direction, how good are you supposed to be at the video game to pop a big explosion around you and have things hit you because you did pop that big explosion around you? It's just not intuitive. And I've had plenty more issues with Brewmaster, and this is before it was buffed twice to be able to hold aggro. And even now, if I slip for 1 second and I don't use my DPS effectively, I lose aggro again. And I'm like maxed gear with my Brewmaster. I'm 675 right now because I don't have any myth track items, but that's not important. But this is just another explanation and another reason why tanking is, I wouldn't say necessarily difficult. It is difficult more than being a DPS for sure, but it is annoying and not intuitive. And people will face these issues. They will not really understand.
I wonder if they could do it, because for people that want to start learning how to tank, and they have so many things on their checklist already, how to make sure they're going the right route, to make sure their pulls are on point and meeting the enemy percentage. Do we really want threat to be an issue for people that are just learning? Or do you think that they should learn this as well? Because this is part of the whole package, brother. You got to learn this shit and you got to get it right, because if you want to be doing these keys at a 12 through 15 and 16, you better get good and know which buttons to be pressing to generate that aggro. I don't want to be running away because you can't hold something. Let me know in the comments.
And what the problem is, the solution to these issues is not very intuitive, and then they will just not want to tank anymore. They will feel tanking is a very demanding and high stressful job, and then we'll have fewer tanks, and that's not good for the health of the game at all.
That's why I'm asking.
I don't know if this has been your experience, so please let us know in the comment section down below. How has your tanking experience gone? Or as a DPS player, do you feel like you have enough tanks in the game for you to join groups and do dungeons and raids with? Or are tanks actually going extinct? I'm so upset, I cannot even pronounce right. But speaking of tanks and of vengeance, you gotta check our Vengeance and Discipline Priest video on the meta debate between Marcellian and I, where we throw out talking points at each other as to why these specs are so good, why you should play them, why they are meta, and maybe why you shouldn't play them if you don't really like them. In this video, right here.
Definitely something to watch. I think it's interesting. I'm not gonna lie. I think it's something that you want to try and get into. You want to learn it. You want to try and figure out what videos. You know, always go into watching a video for your class. That's my belief. Especially if you're coming from very little experience, very little knowledge. Always watch the videos on trying to get your rotation down and like what tank busters you have to try and worry about to make sure you're using your big defensives, you know? So if you like the content, please, by all means, like, subscribe, leave a comment, have a discussion with me. I appreciate it. And I'll see you in the next one.